Hello, this is the Provoked Prawn, and this is the glorious Model I. This is another interesting, lightweight and affordable gaming mouse from Glorious, which packs in some interesting specs and some interesting highlights, including 9 programmable buttons and buttons that can be customized with swappable side buttons, so you can customize the fit and the feel of them. So you'll see some of that as we go through this unboxing and review video. I'm going to be talking to you about what's included in the box, what you can do with the mouse, and the various things of interest about it. Now, this is a really affordable mouse that comes in somewhere around $59, so it's really affordable. Obviously, it's a wired mouse and an interesting addition to the Glorious lineup. In my mind, this is quite a long and large mouse by comparison to the other mice from Glorious that I've tried, and it has a very nice fit with that wonderful ergonomic side thumb rest and multiple buttons, and a good spec for the money too. So you're looking at 400 IPS, 50 Gs acceleration, 1000 Hertz polling rate, 1 mil liftoff distance, and things like that are adjustable in the Glorious core software, and up to 19,000 DPI. So you can customize a number of different things, and as you'll see out of the box, you get a number of different switches included in there. I'll link in the description to a video which talks about customizing the various buttons, but I'm also going to show that in this video and show off how that works. Now, this is another lightweight mouse, as I said, that is claimed to weigh in at 69 grams with some variance, and I'll show how mine is a little bit heavier and talk about that a bit later on. And there are some other interesting points in here. So you'll have seen some of the RGB lighting at the beginning. So it has 3 RGB lighting zones, which I'll show off in a bit more depth later on, along either side and on the mouse wheel. On the underside, you'll find the usual slick PTFE feet with the little blue stickers on that will protect them when they're in the box. And then obviously the other points is that it has those switches. Now, it uses Glorious switches that are rated to 80 million clicks. You've got DPI switching buttons behind the mouse wheel, and obviously those side buttons as well. And I found the clicks to be really satisfying. I'll leave a sample of the sound at the end of the video so you can check that out. One of the things that I found as well is that the cable that's included with this is really floppy, and so the whole sort of thing is really easy to move around the desk and also really comfortable. Despite that being a wired mouse, which is sometimes restrictive, the floppy cable of this thing is actually barely noticeable in my experience. And obviously I've tried a lot of wired mice and a lot of wireless ones, and generally wireless is my preference, but you really don't notice it. What I will show is the difference that it makes to the weight of the mouse a bit later on. But on the underside, you'll notice that there's also a tiny little indicator which has a DPI level indicator on it. So just on the right hand side of the sensor is a little light there. So when you change the DPI level on top, you get a little color indicator to let you know what level you're on. As default, it's set to 400, 800, 1600, and 3200 with various settings, and that goes yellow, blue, red, and green. So basically, if you change the levels on top, you can then turn the mouse over and look at the DPI light to let you know what level you're at. A bit strange that they put that on the underside and the DPI buttons on top, because obviously it means if you want to check, you have to lift the mouse up, which kind of defeats the point. But I do certainly prefer that to other mice where some companies have started putting their DPI switching button on the underside, which I just think is even more silly. Now, one of the things that I've noted already is this feels like a larger mouse. I actually think it feels a little too large, and I'll show you how it fits in my hand a bit later on. I generally like larger mice, and I think this one isn't overly large in its body, but it feels quite long. And I'm going to show you a comparison with the Logitech G502 a little bit later, because I think the shape is comparable. So it has this sort of ergonomic shape to it. So you can see like the way the left-hand side sort of moves inwards, and you have that ergonomic thumb rest. And then obviously you have access to multiple buttons here as well. So there's 9 programmable buttons, and they're customizable too, because in the box, as you saw, you get some extra buttons, and these are held on with magnets. Now, it's worth noting, as you'll see in a second, that they're not particularly easy to get off, which I think is a good thing, because it means you're not accidentally going to knock the buttons off and away from the mouse, which could be quite frustrating if you're in the middle of playing, you accidentally knocked one of the buttons off and then it just comes flying off. But here you can see there are some slightly different shaped buttons. Now, you can't swap all the side buttons out, which is odd in itself. Just the rear one at the back and then this front one. This front one is essentially a sniper button, which is that sort of button that you can press and hold, and it will drop the mouse into a lower DPI level for the period of time where you're holding that button down. It's quite a common thing to have a sniper button like that, and obviously you can change it within the Glorious core, but it gives you options. Now, in the box, you'll see these different buttons of a slightly different style, and there is one, as I'll show in a second, which blanks it out. So if you don't want to use it, you can remove it entirely, which is a very nice sort of logic to that as well. And you will also notice the sort of shape changes in the other ones, so you can basically tweak the back one as well to your personal preference. So it's nice to sort of be able to change these around. Now, as default, that front one that I'm showing off now, as I said, is the sniper button. It's actually called DPI lock in the software, and then the other ones are home at the front, forward and back. Those are the default settings. What I found is that you can't go into games and then assign those buttons really easily. You sort of have to do it in the Glorious software, tweak what button presses you want, and then assign that, and then be able to use it in games. So it's not that easy as default to sort of set the buttons to something else, to some action that you might like. I like to use mine for melee, for marking enemies, for example, and doing other things. But I didn't find it was that easy to just dive into the game settings and add an extra level in there. You have to sort of play around in the software, so it's not that easy out of the box. But you can obviously use the software to customize it, and you can tweak various things. And there are profile settings as well, so you can set up various profiles. I'll show you more of the Glorious core later on, but here you can see that blanking plate that I was talking about. So if you don't want to use that button for some reason, you can just get rid of it. And it's nice to have that flexibility. So they have ever so slightly different shapes. One of the other things that you will notice is that the buttons do jut out really nicely. I'm a big fan of easy access side buttons, and there's certainly not a problem with them here because they stick out really nicely, and they're all relatively easy to access as well. So one of the comments I've said already is that I feel like it's a bit long, so it's quite a long mouse. And I think if you have a large hand, that won't be an issue. And if you have particularly long fingers, that won't be an issue. But I feel like my thumb sits quite far back, and it could do with being a bit further forward. This is just how I feel about it. It hasn't been an issue. As I said, I can still access all the buttons as necessary. I don't know. I can't put my finger on why, but I just feel like maybe it's a bit too long. However, as you'll see from the fit and from the gameplay clips later on, I've got on with it just fine. I've actually settled down nicely into it, and I've been, for the most part, impressed with both the comfort and the usability of it. It reacts really well and obviously really quickly to your presses. The Glorious switches are also really satisfying in sort of the click response they give, not just from the main switches, but also from the side ones. Now, this is a lightweight mouse, and I found mine weighed in about 71 or 72 grams. They claim 69, but that's subject to some variance. And you'll see if you put the cable on there, it weighs over 100 grams. Obviously, you're not going to weigh the cable necessarily, but it does obviously add some extra weight depending on where you're putting it. One of the things I have found, though, as I said, is it's so floppy, it just sort of flops around on the desk, and it doesn't really restrict the movement or cause any grief, which is obviously important. Now, one of the reasons that I wanted to look at this mouse is because of its similarities with the G502 and the Razer Basilisk Ultimate. These are obviously a lot more expensive mice and a lot more premium. However, I'm going to do a comparison video still because I think it's worth talking about the differences and showing the fact that the Glorious mouse is a lot more affordable than these, and yet offers a similar sort of setup in terms of the specs and the button layout and the overall shape and feel of them, and just the general action. The G502 Lightspeed is quite a bit heftier and weightier, and perhaps has a bit more of a feel of quality to it in terms of the overall build and the various things. You can adjust the weights on it, for example, and you'll see just sort of the setup of it. But if you put the two mice side by side, they look very similar in the sort of ergonomic shape of them, the slant, the edges, the thumb rest, and obviously those side buttons and the way you'd access those. So if you've been looking for an alternative to the G502, perhaps that mouse was too heavy or too expensive, and you want something a bit more affordable and perhaps just as comfortable and also just as customizable in terms of the button layout at least, then the Glorious Model I might well be a logical option. And I actually have really enjoyed my time with it to that end. Now you can see a little look at that lighting, and I'm going to leave a couple of clips at the end of the video so you can hear the switches, but what you'll see is there isn't much travel in the buttons when you're pressing them. I also feel like the side buttons give a really satisfying click that I've not really felt on other mice. Generally, you find the main buttons left and right are the ones that have the best quality to them, and then the side ones are kind of an afterthought and they're not as nice. But on this mouse, they actually have a nice response. That said, they all sound kind of different and feel a little bit different as well, so it's worth bearing that in mind. If you like your mouse buttons to all feel the same, you're going to feel a little bit disappointed. So as you can see, so far, I'm pretty happy with this mouse. Overall, my experience has been good. My only real complaint is that it feels a little bit too long. I'd really like to see a wireless version of this. I think that would be a lot more comfortable, at least for me personally. Obviously, it would add a bit of extra weight into it, but I just like the flexibility of wireless mice and not having to think about cables and the issues there. However, you'll see me playing a little bit of Battlefield here, and I just found it was really responsive and it's been working really well. I've been playing Rainbow Six Siege with it over the last couple of weekends and enjoying myself quite a bit. Also, just day-to-day use, it's been really comfortable. The honeycomb shell obviously keeps the weight down. It also is relatively easy to grip. It has a matte body on it as well. This sort of matte finish on the mouse means that it doesn't pick up oils and things like that. It's actually really well designed in that. In the couple of weeks that I've been using it, I've not noticed any problems with the mouse getting marred or dirty from oils or from sweat and other things. And so the end result is a very comfortable mouse and a well thought out one with a lot of logic to it. It's also a lot of fun to game with, and I'd recommend checking out Ready or Not if you haven't already. Hilarious. And subscribe to my gameplay channel to see some clips of the shenanigans going on here. If you're wondering why I'm not using a keyboard, it's because that's on my lap, because I was actually trying to get shots of these speakers, which I'll be doing a review on separately. So stick with me for that. Now I'm going to go into the glorious core and show you what's possible there, and then I'll include some clips of the mouse buttons. And here we are within the glorious core software. Now this is a fairly straightforward interface to use, which is one of the satisfying things about the mouse. So you just click on the mouse and you dropped into the settings here. You'll notice in the top left immediately that you have 3 different profile settings that you can set up for various different use cases. That will come in handy for sure. In the lighting section, you'll see there are various different lighting modes. Now there are 3 lighting bits on the mouse, either side, and the mouse wheel. One thing I have noticed though is that the lighting doesn't shine through the honeycomb center, which is something that I have seen on other lightweight honeycomb mice, which is a bit of a shame. But there are various different lighting effects. You can see that there's glorious mode, various different breathing effects, single color, tail, rave, and other things. This tail one sort of shoots from the front to the back in a weird way, and then you also have rave, and you can turn them off completely if you like. You'll also notice that you can adjust both the rate and the brightness of the speed and the brightness of the RGB lighting. Certainly not the fanciest RGB lighting I've seen, but it is customizable. The key bindings is perhaps more interesting setup. So you'll notice on the left hand side here we have the DPI lock, which is the sniper button I was talking about before. This sets your mouse to 400 DPI when you press and hold it. So this drops it down into a lower DPI. You can obviously customize and adjust that if you want to, or change it for something completely different. The other thumb buttons are then home, forward, and backwards. As I said, these are a little bit fiddly to change in game, but you do have the option to select from a number of different things, whether that's modifier or simply a key. So if we go through, we might want to select a number key, for example. So if I select 2, which is likely to be your pistol in most first-person shooter games, for example, you could do that, and then you could just easily adjust that button. Press save, and it'll save into the mouse, and then you have a different button setup. So it's really easy to do that, and obviously you can also choose from various different mouse functions and go right down into recording macros. So you can record and assign macros to the various buttons on the mice. Also worth noting here that under the mouse functions you have both profile cycle up and down. So if you've created a new profile for different uses, whether that's for different games or for different productivity reasons, you can assign a button so you can switch between those profiles on the mouse, and you don't necessarily need the software or need to alt tab to it. You'll also see the DPI up and down buttons behind the mouse wheel are customizable too, so you can change that if you don't want to set a DPI level, or if you have one level you're constantly using, then obviously you can adjust that there and then set those. So there's quite a few different programmable buttons, and you can do all sorts of things. Another thing that you can do is you can disable a button in the software. So I've already shown that you can swap out the buttons with a blanking plate, but you can also disable them entirely. If you go into the performance setting, you'll see there are 4 DPI stages set as default: 400, 800, 1600 and 3200. You'll notice they're yellow, blue, red and green on the LED indicator. You can customize these though, so you can see that you can drag it up to 19,000 DPI as the maximum and 100 as the minimum. Switch between those. You have an adjustable lift-off distance of 1 mil to 2 mil, and you can also adjust the debounce time. That's to prevent double-clicking issues, although with these switches you shouldn't have an issue for quite some time. The polling rate is set as default to 1000 Hertz too. So as you can see, fairly straightforward software, lots of potential customization options in here. Now be sure to check out the specs and links in the description for other things that might be useful, and stick with me to hear the mouse clicks and the sounds from the mouse. This has been the Provoked Prawn. Smash that subscribe button if you've enjoyed this video so far. Thanks for watching. This has been the Provoked Prawn. Hope you found this video useful, interesting, hilarious, or otherwise. Take a look at these other videos that I think you might find interesting as well. And have a look at the description for links and other information you might find useful. Click that join button to see the benefits of being a member of my YouTube channel. And most importantly, have a great life.